If you enjoy stories about family, karma, and the quiet strength of a mother who finally stands up for herself, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Margaret was 61 years old when her son changed everything with 6 casual words. She was standing at her kitchen counter that evening, chopping onions for a pot of soup, the radio playing low in the background, the way it always did when she cooked. Her son David walked in, opened the refrigerator like he had 100 times before, grabbed a soda, and said it as if he were mentioning the weather. "Mom, I am getting married." Margaret set down her knife. She turned to look at him, waiting for more, waiting for the excitement she expected to hear in his voice. It never came. David was 32 years old, and he had been dating a woman named Angela for 5 years. He said the words the way a person might announce they were switching insurance providers. Practical. Final. Not particularly happy. Not particularly sad. Just the next box to check. Margaret felt something tighten in her chest, but she did not let it show on her face. She had learned a long time ago that a mother's job was not to live her child's life for him. So instead of asking the questions swirling in her mind, she wiped her hands on her apron, walked over, and hugged her son. "If that is what you want," she told him, "then it is your life to live, not mine." She meant it. She truly did. But underneath those words was a quiet unease she could not shake, because in 5 years of dating, Angela had never once been warm toward her. Not cold exactly, just distant. Polite in the way a person is polite to a stranger holding a clipboard. Margaret had hoped that once the wedding happened, once Angela became part of the family in every official sense, something might soften between them. She was wrong. It did not soften. It hardened. The comments started small, the way most things do. A remark about how outdated Margaret's house looked, how it could use a renovation, how nobody kept floral wallpaper anymore. Then it moved to her clothes, comments wrapped in a smile so that they almost sounded like jokes, except they never quite were. Angela once looked her up and down at a family dinner and asked with a little laugh if Margaret had ever thought about getting her hair done somewhere nice. Margaret laughed along, because what else was there to do? But she went home that night and stood in front of her bathroom mirror for a long time, looking at herself the way Angela must have been looking at her. Margaret was, by any honest measure, a wonderful cook. Her friends had told her so for decades. Her Sunday dinners used to be the kind of thing people planned their week around, roasts and casseroles and pies that filled the whole house with a smell like home. When David and Angela got engaged, Margaret decided to lean into what she did best. She started hosting Sunday dinners again, hoping that if words could not build a bridge between her and Angela, maybe food could. The first Sunday, she made a roast chicken with herbs from her own garden, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a pie for dessert. She set the table with her good dishes, the ones that had belonged to her own mother. Angela sat down, looked at the spread, and asked if the chicken was organic. Margaret told her no. It was just chicken from the grocery store, the same kind she had been buying for 30 years. Angela pushed her plate back an inch, just enough to make the gesture visible, and picked up her wine glass instead. She did not touch another bite for the rest of the evening. David, to his credit, ate everything on his plate that first week, cleaning it the way he had since he was a boy. But by the third Sunday, Angela had started taking his plate away from him mid-meal, telling him not to eat that garbage, that it was not good for him, that they needed to be more careful about what they put in their bodies. Margaret stopped hosting Sunday dinners after that. She told herself it was not worth the hurt, and she was right. 2 years passed. Margaret saw her son less and less, mostly at holidays, mostly for an hour or two before Angela found a reason they needed to leave. Then, one afternoon, scrolling through social media the way she sometimes did in the evenings, Margaret found out she was going to be a grandmother, not from a phone call, not from a visit. From a photograph posted online, a small pair of baby shoes next to a positive pregnancy test, captioned with 3 heart emojis and the words, "We cannot wait." Margaret read it 3 times before it fully landed. Her first grandchild. She did not care that she had found out this way. She sat at her kitchen table and cried, happy tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep and old, and she began knitting that same week. She wanted to make something with her own hands, something that would mean more than anything she could buy in a store. Months later, the baby was born. David sent her a text message with a single photograph attached, a tiny red-faced boy wrapped in a hospital blanket. Margaret's heart nearly burst looking at it. She immediately began preparing to drive to the hospital, packing a small bag, thinking about which flowers to bring. Then a second message came through. Angela wants some time, for just the 2 of us to bond with him first. Maybe wait a bit before coming, okay? Margaret sat down slowly on the edge of her bed, the packed bag still in her hands. She told herself it was understandable. New parents needed space. She would wait, because that was the kind thing to do, the generous thing to do. That same evening, scrolling through social media again, she saw new photographs. Angela's mother sitting in a hospital chair holding the baby, beaming into the camera. The caption read, "Grandma's first cuddles." Margaret closed the app and set her phone face down on the nightstand. She did not cry that time. She simply sat in the quiet of her bedroom for a long while, feeling something inside her shift, like a door closing somewhere she could not quite see. When the new family finally came home from the hospital, Margaret drove over with a gift she had spent weeks making, a quilt, hand-stitched, soft blues and yellows sewn together one careful square at a time. She had poured hours into it, late nights with her reading glasses on and her fingers aching, thinking about the little boy who would one day be old enough to understand that his grandmother had made it just for him. She stood on the porch and rang the bell, quilt folded carefully in her arms. Angela opened the door, glanced down at the gift, and did not reach for it right away. "Our dog will probably enjoy sleeping on that," she said, and turned to walk back inside, leaving Margaret standing there in the doorway. Margaret followed her in anyway, because she had come this far and she was not about to leave without seeing her grandson. The baby was asleep in a bassinet in the living room, and Margaret asked gently if she could hold him. Angela looked her over, top to bottom, the same look she had given her clothes years earlier, and said that Margaret looked a little dirty, that her hands probably had too many germs to be near a newborn. Margaret opened her mouth to explain that she had showered less than an hour before leaving her house, that she had even changed into a clean blouse just for this visit. But before she could say a word, David spoke up from across the room, his eyes fixed on the floor instead of on his mother. "Maybe this isn't a good time, Mom. Maybe you should go home and clean up first." Margaret stood there for a moment, the quilt still folded in, her arm since nobody had taken it from her. She looked at her son, waiting for him to meet her eyes, waiting for him to take her side just once. He did not look up. She set the quilt gently on the arm of the sofa, said a quiet goodbye, and let herself out. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked to her car, sat behind the wheel in the driveway for several minutes, and then drove home in silence. That was the moment something in Margaret settled, quietly and permanently. She decided she was done trying. Not angry, not bitter, at least not in any way she let herself show. Just done. For the next 3 years, Margaret watched her grandson grow up through a phone screen. Birthday parties she was not invited to. First, steps she saw days later in a video clip. A first day of preschool, captioned proudly, that she only found out about because a cousin had commented on the photo. She sent birthday cards every year with money tucked inside, and she never knew if the boy ever saw them or if they were simply set aside somewhere. She kept sending them anyway, because that was the kind of woman she was, even when it was not returned. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, her phone rang. It was David. "Mom," he said, his voice light, almost cheerful, like the years in between had not happened at all. Angela and I are planning a short trip, just the two of us. We really need it, some time to relax and decompress. We were wondering if you could watch him for 4 days. Margaret sat very still, phone pressed to her ear, and for a moment she let herself imagine it. 4 days with her grandson. 4 days of pancakes in the morning and cartoons on the couch. And maybe, finally, a chance to be the grandmother she had always wanted to be. Her heart ached with wanting it. But then she thought of the porch. The quilt nobody wanted. The words too dirty, hanging in the air of that living room while her own son looked at the floor instead of at her. Margaret's voice, when she finally spoke, was calm and even, without a single trace of anger in it. "I'm sorry, David, but you'll need to find someone else. I'm afraid I'm just too dirty, and I wouldn't want to pass along my germs." Then she said goodbye, and she hung up the phone. She did not slam it down. She did not cry afterward. She simply set it on the counter, picked her knife back up, and returned to chopping the onions she had left sitting on the cutting board, the same way she had been doing on the night this all began, years earlier, in that same kitchen. Sometimes in life, a person only gets one chance to make a point so sharp it cannot be ignored. Margaret had waited 3 long years for hers, and when it finally came, she made sure it landed exactly where it needed to. If this story moved you, or reminded you of someone in your own life, do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more real stories about family, boundaries, and the quiet power of knowing your own worth.